what I love about what you've done with your career is, you're obviously into animal behavioral science, and as it ties to dogs and learning, how do they think, how do they learn, what stimuli are they receptive to? But everything that you've done seems to be tied into the training aspect. And I love that because it's not just an attempt to learn something about how dogs think and stop. How does it tie into our relationship with them? Because that's really what matters. If we know something about how dogs think and we don't use it to inform our interactions, what's the point?
Right. I think there are some esoteric questions where it's like, oh, that's cool. We found that out. But yeah, I think coming up in the applied world, working at a shelter, going through, working with clients, my bent has always been, how do we make their lives better? How do we help the people that want to work with them and love them? So yeah, always in the back of my mind is, how is this going to improve how we interact with dogs? And when I was a dog trainer, I kept thinking, there's so many questions we don't know. There's so many things we don't know about these techniques. A lot of it comes from basic science with rats and pigeons, and it's wonderful that we have that. But then how does that translate to dogs, and how does that translate to real world scenarios? And so I think we have these techniques that are rolled out by people saying this is the right way to do it. Like, well, do we know that? How do you know? And so there's just so many questions about what are the best ways to train. And you can get, down into little gritty details of how many trials should I have in a session? How much time should there be between trials? There are just so many things that could impact how successful we are as a trainer.
Mm-hmm. And you've done a bunch of research on this. And one of the studies that I don't remember if you published it solely or if it was a co-authored thing, but it was about whether dogs prefer food as a reward or was it praise and petting, or was it just praise?
When we looked at the reinforcer efficacy, it was petting and praise. And then in another paper, we broke that down. So that was looking at how effective the reinforcer was. And then we had a separate paper looking at which dogs preferred. And in that, it was just petting versus just food.
Mm-hmm. And what'd you find?
Usually food wins out. Certainly as a reinforcer for repetitive behaviors, the social interaction, and I will admit, it was cheap social interaction. It was 4 seconds because we equated it to how long the food delivery was. So it's not the end all be all study. We can certainly look at different durations of social interaction. But I think from that, we did find that food produced fast responding and high rates of responding. And this is exactly why we use this in training classes, is we can get a lot of repetitions and get a lot of learning going for the dog. We have some unpublished data that I need to add some more conditions to, that we do find that social interaction might be a reinforcer, but it has to be spaced out. It can't be back to back to back to back like we did, like asking the dog to sit and then giving them praise and down and giving them praise. That if it's spaced out throughout the day, where you give social interaction a few times, and then the dog probably gets some other reinforcers like food or a walk or play in between, that it might be a reinforcer, but they might satiate on it really quickly so that you can't use it.
Mm-hmm. So did those findings, well, one question before we get to this, who was delivering the praise and the petting in that? Was it owner, or was it?
So we tested shelter dogs, and in that case, it was a stranger because they didn't know us. And that's why we did test owned dogs, and we got the same results. And in that case, the owners were delivering because we thought maybe their praise had been more conditioned and it was more meaningful.
But the food won out? The
food won out, okay. Yeah. I will say one thing about our preference study, where we looked at do dogs want to hang out with somebody that's giving them food or petting, that in our shelter dogs, and I think this ties in maybe to what Jessica Heckman was talking about, the dogs in that study, the shelter dogs, were the ones that were most likely to opt for petting or prefer petting. Our owned dogs almost exclusively preferred food. And the only way we could make our own dogs look like shelter dogs, meaning that when food was less available, they'd actually go to the food person and hang out. Because usually in our own dogs, when we reduced how frequently we were delivering food to them, if they weren't getting the amount of food they wanted, they wouldn't go and get petting from the other person. They'd just go lay in the corner. Like, I don't want to be with any of you. So the only conditions we found that we could make our own dogs look like shelter dogs, in the sense that when food became less available, they'd actually say, I do want to go get petting, was when we put them in an unfamiliar, probably stress-inducing room, and the owner was the one providing the petting.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, then when food was less available, they would potentially go over and get petting.
So how definitive were the results?
I think so in our designs, we do lots of repeated measures on the same dog, and they're very typically replicable. We do find individual differences, and we always plot those out, because I think that's one of the other things. A lot of scientific domains kind of collapse the data into an average, and there's just no average dog. And so we keep that individual variability and break out the individual dog's graphs. And so I think we do see some individual differences, but the overall trend was the same.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's where I was going with that. Because when I got down the rabbit hole of your research, then I ran across this research. I think Dr. Byrne is the name, from Emory University. Have you seen that? I don't know.
Yeah.
And so what they did was they had to find dogs that could sit in an MRI machine and still, which is not, so I don't know if that probably flavored the results a little bit, because you have to find a dog that can sit there. But I think they trained through 3 objects. One was a control, and one resulted in petting and praise, and one resulted in food. And their results showed praise, but just, it was like kind of barely, like that like barely won out. And it was it was all an owner trial. There wasn't strangers or anybody else. But what it showed and it was only 13 dogs, but when you looked at it, the results, it was like, okay, 6 of them really went for the praise, 5 of them really went for, or were kind of agnostic. They would go either way. And then 2 of them were just nuts over the food. And really what it said in some capacities, what you just said there, is like, yeah, like there's definitely, they lean toward the food, or they definitely lean toward this or that, but the individual preferences varied wildly in that study.
Yeah, and I think that's always important to remember is, trying to assess the dog that's in front of us and not just what we know about dogs in general. I think one thing about their study, and I'm like you, I'm super impressed they can get dogs to lay still in an MRI. I do think in their praise condition, the praise was delivered when the owner returned into praise. And so I think that's a confound. I think some of our other research suggests that access to the owner is highly reinforcing. So I think I would have loved to have them separate those 2 conditions out. Owner return,
mm-hmm.
and the owner maybe already there, and then delivering praise. I'm always wondering if the effects that they saw were due to visual access to the owner again.
When I ran across this, I'm like, is she going to be able to debunk this? Because I knew you would be thinking about this differently than I did. And what they did was they were looking at the reward center in the brain to see if it light up with the MRI. And so what you're saying is, instead of having the owner stand there, and, the dog's like, okay, the owner's here already, they're coming into the room, and we all know dogs get excited when we walk into the room. And so you're saying, maybe not. But that, if they would have separated that out, we would have a clearer, we would see this picture much more clearly in knowing whether they actually preferred the praise versus they were excited about seeing their owner.
Right. And as much as I sort of, people give me a hard time about my research proving dogs don't love us, which I don't speak about love. I'm just talking about, what do we do that dogs will like about us? And I want to be a better owner, so I need to understand what my dog likes. We do have other data that is a little more warm and fuzzy, showing that owners are reinforcers for their dogs, and that dogs will work to be with us. And I always tell my students when I talk about this research that anybody who can't go to the bathroom on their own anymore because they have a dog already knows the answer to my question, which is, will dogs work to be in a room with you when they're separated from you? And they certainly will. So I do think that the owner themselves is a very important stimulus to the dog. And that relationship through positive reinforcement can be really important.
Well, for sure. And what you're saying there is, we run across this theme over and over and over with guests of this podcast, where it's understand the pack mentality and the social aspect of these dogs, but maybe don't make the anthropomorphic leap that this dog is super in love with you, because it's a different thing than probably we understand. And I know people are going to hear that and go, my dog loves me. And it's like, I don't know how to address that. Like we don't know that that's really what's going on, but we for certain know that they definitely want to choose to be around us, and they are very social. And you see some of the studies between even domesticated wolves and domestic dogs, and, the eye contact and the working together with people. There's definitely, our dogs definitely have evolved to work with us and socially bind to us and stuff. But you're saying maybe hold off on the red roses on February 14th for your dog?
Well, I always joke that as much as I say that food is an important stimulus for our dog, and I give food out freely to build good relationships with my animals, we do that with humans too, right? When we start dating someone, we take them to restaurants. We give them reinforcing stimuli to try and pair ourselves with good things. So I always take it the other way and say, maybe it's love, but maybe our love isn't that special because it's based on reinforcement too.
100%. I mean, my wife is never happier than when I take her to Olive Garden. Like,
Exactly.
That's just treat training my spouse, I guess. And she does that shit to me all the time. Like, believe me, no, you're right. So, we're talking monkeys, and we're rewarding each other the same way we reward our dog companions.
Exactly.
So
Right.
anyway, this will be a fun one for all the hate mail. We'll deflect that later. People are going to listen to that and they're going to go, well, this lady, maybe she doesn't love her animals the same way. Doing a little research on you, I would say that's not true. I think that you probably do love animals, right?
Oh, I do. I'm totally obsessed with my animals. We have currently 3 dogs and 4 cats and chickens and a horse. And if I could get more and have the time for more, I would. I'm totally in love with them. And to me, I don't really care if they love me. I want to give them good lives, and I like that they want to hang out with me. And the reason they hang out with me is because I identify things that are important to them and deliver that to them. So.
Yeah, sometimes we don't need to overanalyze stuff. Sometimes we can just take it for what it is. In my space, in the outdoor writer space, you see people, really trying hard to, make fishing seem like something, this romantic notion of, being one with nature and stuff. And I'm like, sometimes I sit there, I'm like, am I the same person, like the same kind of person to these people? I just like to fish. Like it's exciting to me to catch. I don't, you know what I mean? Like sometimes
I don't need to write poetry about it to love it.
No, it can just be this thing that we just enjoy. And we're, just like our dogs, we're just individuals. So let's go back in time here for a second to the research you did on finding that dogs generally prefer food as a reward. I'm assuming that makes you a fairly big advocate of treat training puppies and using that throughout, to get a positive behavior out of dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. I sort of think that that's such an important stimulus for all animals. If they didn't like food, they wouldn't survive. And we kind of throw it away when we just give it to them in a bowl and then, call it a day. This is why, one of the reasons we have dogs that are destroying our homes. They would normally be out foraging all day looking for food, and now they're in our apartment and bored. So why not share the couch? So I think we ought to use food as much as we can to build a positive relationship. And there are other things that go into that. Certainly, I want to condition myself as a good stimulus so that there are times when I don't have food on me, and yet my dog still wants to be with me because I've been a reinforcing stimulus. I've been a safe stimulus. I've not done scary things to them. And then there's toys. And I know with the sporting dogs, a lot of them are big toy dogs. So I think just thinking about all the things that your dog really loves and wants and figure out how you can deliver that for behavior that you want. So you get the behavior you want out of the dog, and the dog has a, a rocking good time all the time.
Yep. And that's, I have people once in a while, they'll email me or DM me on social media and say they don't believe in treat training, or they don't think it's, and so to some people, there's a negative connotation to it. I think part of it is, it's like, it feels like a shortcut, to train, like, oh, I really know how to train, I don't need to use a treat. And it's like, well, I'm not that way. And some of my favorite dog trainers definitely aren't that way either. And really what you're saying is, yeah, you could go wrong with treat training if you're not really using it to ask the right questions and get the dog to work for their reward, then sure. Yeah. If you're just handing out treats, it's like, if I just give my kids ice cream all the time, like, they're not gonna, like, it's not gonna make them good kids. Like, they're gonna get what they want without working. But if I say, you guys got to clean your room, then you can have some ice cream, that they actually, kids and dogs, thrive on that. And this is something we go over all the time on this podcast is, what are you asking of your dog? And, where's the challenge? Where's the reward? How does the positive behavior you want come in? And treat training, especially, if you're talking a little puppy that comes in, that's not really bonded to you at 7 weeks, 8 weeks old, and you're trying to get those basic obedience things down, that dog is thinking through its stomach. And it's just such a positive way to get some good behavior out of them.
Absolutely. And I think, there are other ways, as you alluded to, of training. And the reasons I don't choose those ways is not because of the main effects of the stimuli, but the side effects. And I really like the side effects of positive reinforcement training, that I get affiliative behavior. I get learners that are engaged. My horse is clicker trained, and we'll be walking along and he will like try and veer into the arena because he wants to work. And to me, that's really different. When I was a child taking riding lessons, I had horses that I was riding that were, bucking and turning and running from the arena because they didn't want to work, because it wasn't fun.
Yep.
And so to see that attitude in him and my dogs, it's just wonderful. And that's what I really love, is seeing that enthusiasm, that desire to work with me, it's hugely reinforcing for me. So